Yeah.
Hello everyone. We're doing the Q&A, which we're going to be morphing more and more into a podcast. Would you like to tell everyone a little bit about our podcast, Dad?
Well, I should have said, good morning, hello. Very nice for you all to join us. Freya had this idea of doing a podcast that would be morphed from the Q&As. And my new book, the fourth book, we decided to call The Secret Path. And pro tem, at least, the podcast will be called The Secret Path as well. And it'll have a bias towards creativity in the future.
Yeah, I've been contacted, huh?
This is your idea, you tell us more.
Okay, so there are two kind of things about it that I was thinking. One is that obviously now everyone's sort of slightly going back to work and getting their lives in order a bit. A podcast might be a better way of having these conversations. And also, I was thinking of this time, having said that, England's going into lockdown again, and it feels like a sort of global incubation period. And my idea was that talking about creativity with artists and musicians and writers and futurists, it might be a really good opportunity to start considering what world we want to go back into once we're all allowed out again. Maybe it's a good time to start laying the foundations for that. So we've been asking some people who we thought would be very exciting people to talk to and share ideas with. And we've got 4 OKs already, which is very exciting from very interesting people. So hopefully we'll start recording those ASAP.
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 Good, yeah.
Yeah.
They will be fun.
What, sorry?
They will be fun.
They will be really fun. What I'd really like to do as well is keep interspersing it with conversations with Dad and I with some of your questions, because they're a really good foundation, I think, for having these conversations. We get some really good questions. So I want to keep Dad and I's talks with your questions as part of it as well, but start bringing in people to talk on wider, broader subjects. So shall we begin with somebody's question?
Yes, let's do that.
Is there anything else? Got any updates? Got any news? What's going on?
Well, I don't know if Christabel didn't send me some questions. I'm looking for them to send to you.
What Dad isn't saying, so I will, is that we're launching the autumn painting course, and that's going to be starting on the 28th of October, but we are open for people to join us. If you go to the rogerdean.com website and you go to shop, it's in courses, and you can sign up with Dad, and Dad will be doing watercolour painting tutorials for 6 weeks for a limited number of students.
The focus is on drawing as well as watercolour.
Sort of drawing watercolours in the vein of Tales from Topographic Oceans and Asia Alpha and Relaya, that kind of work. Is that right?
Yes. That's exactly right.
So if you'd like to join and you have an hour a week free from the 28th, more if you want to paint as well. The information and all of that is on the website. Yeah. So should we start? I've got a question from John Vehadia. And he says, hello, Mr. Dean. I was wondering if you're envisioning your work as being part of another parallel Earth, and would it be at the same time as us or sometime in the future or past? Maybe you think they are landscapes from different planets or dimensions. Thank you. I'm really enjoying the sessions and wish I could draw better and explore similar places like you. P.S. My name is pronounced like deja vu. I'm not sure how to make vehadija. Okay, sorry about that. John. You're going to be John from now on. So that's a question that's come up a couple of times, isn't it? Where are your places?
I think of them as, yes, here and now, but different. Yes. Sometimes the pictures are futuristic or, mechanical fantasies, but basically it's a different here and now. When I'm painting the architecture and a lot of the landscapes, I'm not thinking of some future world. I'm thinking of our world, how it could be and should be, I think.
So you're making these places with it in mind that you want these to happen?
Yeah, if they served any purpose other than an artistic purpose, I would want them to be an inspiration, say, we can have this. Let's do it.
Okay. We've got a little question here from Microphone. Any more pin designs in the works?
Well, actually, there are, yes. I don't know if we have a schedule, but we definitely have more designs. Too short an answer for you to read the next question.
Yeah,
I've just emailed you Christabel's letter, by the way.
Ah, okay. Okay, so this question is from Stew Flies. He's written loads of great stuff that I'd like to get into, but I think we'll start here. Does the lack of magic in our education and cityscape explain the popularity of Harry Potter? J.K. Rowling's phenomenon started at a grassroots level, and as such, it is not the same as every kid's satchel portraying a Disney princess / Marvel superhero, which are pretty obviously popular because the marketing possibilities driving these films have been expertly thought out. The magic contained in these films is commodified rather than being the environment as it was at your school. I will avoid speculation as to the introduction of more unrealistic expectations in terms of wizards being able to fly, etc. So yeah, I guess his question is, does the lack of magic in our education and cityscapes explain the popularity of Harry Potter? And I guess by extension, a lot of sort of children's books maybe about magic.
Well, it might do, because there is a very solid tradition of books which have a magical theme, from Lord of the Rings, Narnia, Wizard of Earthsea. It's a solid thing. But I would address this as two separate questions. I think there is a desire for magic, and I would say differently. I think it's there if you look. Not in the way that it's portrayed necessarily, but it is there. But our cities, sadly, are very bereft of magic. They're very bereft of humanity. And I think the question is, we shouldn't be there desiring an alternative magic. We should be desiring a rethink of our cities in a major way, so that they have that quality of magic and interest and humanity that they sadly really lack now. And I would say we never did celebrate the life of Ken Robinson, who sadly died this year.
Yeah.
But he was an incredibly interesting thinker about creativity and education. You can see his talks on TED. So look up Ken Robinson TED and see what he has to say. But I do think we need to think slightly differently about our education too. And art school education, not just slightly differently, but massively differently. So I would say, yes, our cities and our education need more magic rather than needing us to find the alternative to them. We need to demand more humanity, more interest, more creativity, and just altogether a better place to live.
I think, like, from my point of view, if you're thinking about education, I definitely think that there comes a point where it does get squashed out if you're a child. And I think children, probably if left to their own devices, would believe in certain forms of magic a lot longer than they tend to if they were allowed to. I went to a Steiner school, and the kindergarten was absolutely magical. There was nothing sort of artificial allowed at all. All the toys were wooden. It was like all silk and cotton fabrics and crystals and candles, and we all like made food for lunch, and no one was allowed like crisps or sweets or plastic anything. I think we weren't even allowed pens till we were about 13. and 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 that was really, really magical. And even now, like when I see, because it's got a very distinctive aesthetic, even now when I see rooms painted with that sort of watercolor wash or those sort of colored fabrics, it reminds me of just that total indistinction between reality and magic. And the simplicity of those toys was supposed to elicit that feeling of you being able to create anything from that. So you'd have a green fabric and that would suddenly be hills, and a blue one and that would be a river. And, you know, there wasn't this sense of, well, that's not realistic looking, so it's not a real place, because it absolutely was. And then I went to a normal school, and then it sort of hits you: plastic chairs, plastic cartons with your name written in some sort of, you know, basic font, and everything in primary colors in a, you know, block building. And then that's a really harsh reality. It's sort of like a second birth. You go from this kind of lovely, woomy, soft place into this hard, metallic, noisy, you know, crunchy, crinkly place. And
You
I
went
think, huh?
forwards several times.
What?
You went backwards and forwards several times, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. And so, and also, like, mum taught at a Scientology school for a bit. She's not a Scientologist, but she did teach at one. And that was really interesting as well, because that was another totally different way of doing things. And if I was going to say anything for them, one of the things that they did was very like what Ken Robinson talked about, was you didn't have classes in age groups. You had separate classes where a child would move up once they'd kind of accomplished that, or they'd do another year. And because different children were good at different things, there wasn't a stigma attached. Because, you know, one child might not be very good at art, but they'd be really good at maths or drama, and everyone had different capabilities, and no one was sort of critical about it. And I thought, well, that's as Ken Robinson said. And what it also meant was every child, you know, there was sort of no one left behind when the year group went up. Everyone just got done what they had to get done and moved up at their own pace with everything.
If I get a chance, I'm going to talk to Mark Stevenson about education. But in his second book, We Do Things Differently, he talked about an educational guy who went as a headmaster to a very troubled school. And he found that children acting as tutors to each other, those with strength helping those with weaknesses, worked better than teachers intervening all the time. But we should go there. But there was, I must just finish talking about Ken Robinson with what I thought was a very lovely anecdote. And I'm not sure if it didn't refer to a little girl called Alice. Do you remember? She was painting and hiding her painting. And she was painting away like this. And her teacher said, "Oh, Alice, what are you painting?" And she said, "I'm painting God." And the teacher says, "But nobody knows what God looks like." And her reply was, "Well, they will in a minute."
What happens to us?
Yes, I know.
Yeah, I think it would be really good if there was some way of prolonging that a little bit. I was listening today to Clarissa Pinkola Estes' book, The Joyous Body, and she was talking about how the overculture from a really, really early age just sort of crushes children and, you know, tells them how they're supposed to look and how they're supposed to walk and how they're supposed to behave. And it sort of made me feel a bit mournful for who I might be if that wasn't such a part of the way that we live. This very, you know, I mean, we talked about it last time, this kind of really narrow idea of how people are supposed to look and be and behave and what they're supposed to do. And I remember what I was like having, you know, gone to a Steiner school and having two artist parents and growing up sort of, you know, not in the country, but sort of. I wasn't really bombarded with a lot of that stuff. And I was so like sort of strident and adamant about myself and my authority and my own sense of myself and how brilliant I am. And I was just watching the other day that video of my 7th birthday where I'm like ordering you and mum around.
You were a monster.
And like, and part of me thinks, ugh, but part of me also thinks, you know, I would have liked a more gentle easing out of that if it had to have happened. Do you know what I mean? That kind of, that self-confidence that sort of, you know, you have to really hang on to if you can.
But you did alternate the Steiner education with the mainstream education. And I got the impression that when you went to Kingston Primary School, you liked it.
I liked it very much. I think there's pros and cons to all different places. I think the ideal was, I mean, one of the things that I liked about, so I did my exams just in sort of local state schools. And one of the things that I liked about that was how kind of big they were and how sort of anonymous you could be. You know, you could kind of make friends from different classes and you could evolve and, you know, try out different versions of yourself and get to know different people. Whereas the Steiner system is, you're sort of in the class of people that you're in from when you're 4 years old to when you're 18. And they do this thing where they sort of teach you to who you are. They sort of want to bring out your individuality, and they've got the time and the space for that because they're small classes. But the problem with that is, I think on the one hand it's great because if you kind of get established as something that you're comfortable with, then you can take that through, but it leaves no room for evolution. Because if you're at 4 years old the sort of quiet nerdy one or the loud annoying one or whatever it is you are, then that's what you're going to be till you're 18, and there's very little opportunity for testing anything different.
No reset.
There's no reset and there's no slack in the rope for trying things out. Whereas if you're in a big sort of school, you know, where there's people coming in and out, you can sort of be like, do you know what, I've sort of had enough of this sort of way that people see me. I'm gonna shake it up a bit. And we probably all revert eventually to what we were like when we were 7, but I hope. I'm working on it. But I think it's good to try the things out. I wonder what the ideal would be. Something flexible and on a kind of relatively big scale-ish, but also somehow managing to keep that magic community feeling.
I think it's a bad age. I think the Steiner system worked very well when you were very young. It was a much more gentle introduction to school. Anyway, we should move on, see if there's any more questions.
There are more questions. Okay, so this is from Isotope. My question for Roger is, Are you still looking to revive Paper Tiger, and did you ever meet Tim White, whom you published? What was he like, and what technique did he use? Thanks, Christopher Pell.
Well, we are thinking of reviving the publishing companies. And yes, I did know Tim White very well. I liked him very much. And he was a very good painter. He worked with me on a War of the Worlds project with 2 other artists. And we collaborated. I did the drawing and he did the painting. And that was fun. And I worked with him because he was very good at painting. Yes, I liked him.
So was he the one who painted those sort of big red mechanical alien creatures with the long legs? That was his painting.
That was my drawing, his painting. Richard Clifton Day also did some of those. Mike Emden also did some of those paintings. Yeah.
Amazing. And what happened to that project?
Complicated. I was working with Jeff Wayne on the project, and then Hubert took over the negotiations, and for whatever reason, Jeff Wayne's father took over the negotiations from his side, and I think Jeff Wayne's father had a basic attitude that we shouldn't do a collaborative project, they could pay for everything and get the whole job done for 150 quid. I think I'm quoting him on that, but I may be doing him an injustice. In any event, it fell apart. And the point I made to Jeff Wayne was that they weren't paying anything. We were meeting our own costs, and it was a collaboration. And they would have got the same money for the record as they did with or without us, but we would have done it as a parallel book like we did Pentateuch. But in any event, Jeff Wayne's father and Hubert couldn't come to a deal, and we stopped working on it. And then later I had a very good story called Breakout, which those particular paintings were 80–90% of them were perfect for. And we put that together, and we talked to Dino De Laurentiis about doing a joint production for it. And he was asked to put it on hold by, because they thought it would clash with the War of the Worlds film they were doing, although it was a completely different story with Tom Cruise. So all I can say is that it's on the back burner. If I have my way, it will one day happen. But it won't be War of the Worlds. It'll be a completely different story.
What about Paper Tiger?
Well, when you were in England, we set up a new publishing company. It wasn't going to be called Paper Tiger, but it would include a lot of things that were with Paper Tiger. And I think we'll I think when we can move about a little better, we'll get that going. I mean, I have 2 interests. One, same as Freya, it would be lovely to see those sorts of books again. And the other is we have our own books, which we need to get published. And you've had talks with some very interesting people who'd like to help on that, haven't you?
Yes, yeah, because I think one of the things that would be interesting is what would Paper Tiger or your publishing company print now? If you think of the artists that you did before, who are the sort of equivalents of that now? And I think that would be interesting to see.
Well, the point about it back in the day when we did it, there was nothing else remotely like it out there, nothing. Now there is more like it, and there's more alternatives to books, so it would be different. It would have to be different. And of course, you've got several generations of people, you know, it's moved on a bit, and there are, I suppose you'd have to say there are a lot more skilled artists out there now than there was.
I mean,
I think there's still that same gap in the publishing world that allowed us to be very successful back in the mid-70s.
I mean, the generation thing is something interesting as well, though, because one of the things that we were talking about is a lot of the people we want to get on our podcast are people that you've worked with before, or you've worked in the industry with, and their children are now doing it and are very good. And one of the things that I want to do is definitely have these conversations, you know, between you and these people. But I also want, not just for my own selfish megalomaniacal reasons, but would like to do some family chats as well, because I think it's a really interesting dynamic that, and one of the things that we talked about as well is a lot of the people whose children are now getting into the same industry have daughters. And I think it's probably a very recent phenomenon that artists are passing the baton to their girls, because there would have been a time where very few of us could have got away with that sort of malarkey. And so I really want to have these conversations where we're looking at the dynamic of, you know, father-daughter collaborations and how that works and how that feels, because you've got sort of a lot of different interesting dynamics happening there, I think. And also I think it would be nice, like you're going to be talking to some really well-known famous people, and I think we need their daughters bursting their bubble a little bit. Or I should say humanizing them, as people have often said to us.
I want to be humanized.
What? What did you say?
I said, I don't want to be humanized.
It's a bit late for that, Dad.
There you go.
Should have said so at the beginning.
Next question.
Next question is from Danielle Evans. Oh no, wait, sorry. I don't understand that question. We'll come back to it. The next question, David Bagsby. Do you notice a difference in your work due to the live distractions, as in these broadcasts, as opposed to your normal audiobook diversions? So when you're painting live in front of people, is it different to when you're on your own and listen to the books?
The difference is not what you'd expect. When I'm working, listening to a story, I can work for non-stop for an hour or two, or 10 minutes. But I can do a total of quite long periods, 12, 15 hours in a day, and feel great and comfortable about it. It doesn't feel hard work or exhausting. But from time to time, I wander off. You know, I start staring into space. I might just be staring at the picture, or I might literally wander off. I might walk into the garden, feed the cat, talk to the cat, whatever, and come back to it. And one of the things I've been very aware of when I'm painting live is I'm super anxious about the pauses. So the talking and the questions, it works perfectly for me, and I can happily work on with it. But I can't happily stop and stare, because that could last 5 seconds or 5 minutes or an hour and a half, you know. And I don't feel under pressure to paint, but I do feel under pressure not to have too many long pauses.
That's a tricky one, isn't it? Because it's often in that stepping back or looking at it at a different angle, or having, I mean, what I did the other day, which I thought was a really good combination of things, was I stood back, looked it upside down, took a picture, and then went for a run and looked at it while I was running to change the scene. Yes. So I was looking at the same picture, but in a different place. And then all the things that I felt like weren't working just kind of fell into place and how to fix. So that must be quite tricky if you're just having to plow on.
Well, to me, it feels like it's all part of the process. Well, doesn't just feel like it, it absolutely is part of the process. It's like you're rebooting the mind. You're absorbing and digesting what you've done. And seeing it differently is critical. I have a mirror by my easel, which I use all the time when I'm painting. Well, not so often that I get used to the mirror image, because that would defeat the purpose, but it's there. And that downtime, which is not like a rest, it's as intense intellectually as when you're actually painting, more so really, more so. But you have to have that period when the ideas wrap themselves out. Don't interfere, you let it happen. But it might be while you're painting, but it's not, you know. I get so engaged by that process. I can go down to the kitchen to make a cup of tea and come back without having done it, but done something else. And it might be 3 attempts before I get the cup of tea, because the stuff going on is so fascinating. But it's something I can't do live. How can you do it live? It doesn't work. You know, that staring into space is the physical manifestation of some of the busiest times in your mind. And it's not entertaining to watch. It's fantastically, excuse me, fantastically entertaining to experience, but not to watch.
Steve Johnson's question is almost the same, but a slightly different aspect of that, which is, I love what you're doing. I'm interested in how you feel about painting in front of an audience. So he's specifically asking, does that affect it if people are watching? I mean, other than you feel like you can't step back, is there something in people watching itself that affects how you're working? How do you feel about it?
I love working in private, that's true. When you're here working, that still feels like I'm working in private, because we're both listening to the same story. So that works. But I don't mind the occasionally working in front of the audience. But, you know, it's a different experience. It's profoundly different, but it's interesting. Yeah.
I've found, like, when I'm working, when you're doing a painting, it will go through phases of not looking nice or not being clear what it is. And I'm still quite neurotic about that. So I find one of the differences if I'm painting live, or if I'm painting something in time lapse where I'm making a record that I'm going to publicize of the whole process, I feel much more self-conscious about those aesthetically displeasing moments. So rather than probably doing the natural thing of letting it evolve and have patchy areas and, you know, layer it up, I'll try and work on something so you can see where it's going all the time, so it's always looking like something you'd want to see. You can get an idea of where it's going, and I would say that probably affects the outcome. I would say if I was to do 2 paintings of the exact same thing, one in front of people and one not, they probably end up looking different, because in front of people I'm trying to make every stage look good. And I don't know if that's good or not, but I think it definitely affects it.
I think you have to learn to live with the fact that as something morphs from A to B, it goes through what I think of as a muddy period. And that applies to colors. You know, if I do a gradation that goes from one color to another, you have to be very careful. You might need a third way, so it doesn't go from A to B, it goes from A to A plus to B minus to B. Because if it just goes A to B, you get a bright clear color, and mud in the middle. And you either work around that, step aside from that, or learn to live with that, or compress it. And the same applies to a painting or a drawing. A lot of people find the sketches where you construct something, they think of that as ugly. I did. When I was a student, I would do all the construction lines that I'm supposed to do, then I'd do the drawing, and then I'd erase the construction lines. And I remember my tutor saying, don't do that. It's part of the process. It's a continual reference. And he was right. And I've learned very much to embrace that. It's part of the process. It's part of the excitement of the process too. So it is something you must come to terms with.
I feel like that's my age 11 to 15, is that sort of aesthetically displeasing area I would have preferred to have not done in public, but I'm trying to come to terms with.
See, that's an incredibly subjective view.
I don't think so.
You know, you should recognize it as wonderful.
Well, it was that muddy phase where I was getting from childhood to adulthood, I guess, that had to just happen. It was what it was. I'm going to leave the the drawing lines in.
You have to realize that absolutely everybody does that. So
I'm just saying, would have been good if I could have edited that out. Anyway, next question. So this question is from Jerry Moran, and it says, what do you think of the distinctions that are always made between art and illustration? It seems to me that the concept has always taken precedence over the execution of the idea. Norman Rockwell was always dismissed as a mere illustrator. When he painted for the Saturday Evening Post, as if all the imagination lay in the short stories and articles he illustrated and not in his interpretation. Surely that's like saying the old masters were merely illustrators since they sourced folklore, literature, and the Bible to paint from. What a great point.
Well, of course, a lot of people in the art world do think of the old masters as merely illustrators, and it's a profound ignorance, really. I think there's great art, good art, not so good art, and embryonic art. I don't think there's different categories. People might abuse their talents in different ways, but I think the notion that figurative art is merely illustrative is profound cultural ignorance. And yeah, it's great art doesn't come without great skill and great craftsmanship.
And I think it's all storytelling, isn't it?
Well, art is self-contained. It is what it is. It can be narrative. Mine sometimes is has a very strong narrative element. But it's part of what engages you and keeps you reverting back into the world that you've created. Is there that narrative element pulls you in and takes you along and lets you go in a certain way. It is an added element of the art. Yes, I think the world is on an interesting track at the moment. You know, it's over 100 years since, and I've said this so many times, it's 104 years since Marcel Duchamp illustrated a urinal, entitled it The Fountain, and signed Armat. The original, by the way, he never even bothered to collect it after the exhibition. So the original of that is gone. Everything, every piece exhibited now is a replacement.
I wonder what happened to that banana.
Yes, I remember you saying that story. But ever since, you can't keep reinventing. excuse me, today I'm a bit struggling with my voice. But if you say anything can be art, you don't have to define it any more than that. It's a poetical notion. It was a Dadaist idea, and it's been the mainstream of modern art for over 100 years. So my view of it is this: it's profoundly conservative. It is profoundly lacking in content and merit in many ways.
And joy.
Yes, it's without joy. It's without significance. Sadly, that's the worst thing. It's really without significance. What Marcel Duchamp did had significance, but everything else is a subset of that.
Well, we're in danger of going on about this every time for a long time, so I'm going to move on.
Go on.
Next question is for me. Well, but you can answer as well if you want, Dad. Ed Cadera asks me, Freya, do you think you would have become an artist if your father was a bricklayer or a politician? Is it genetics or environment? And I was thinking about this today, and it reminded me of a quote by Dolly Parton, where she said, if I hadn't been born a woman, I would have been a drag queen. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. My point is, I think I don't think it's genetics necessarily, though. I don't think it's genetics necessarily. I think what it was that meant I kept doing it was that Mum and Dad did it, so I was just around it all the time. I never got discouraged, and I saw people, and you copy. So even though I didn't really get any formal tutoring from either of my parents, you just do what your parents do, don't you? And I think that was more to do with it. I think if you and Mum had been the same people but not done art, I don't know, it's just one way of communicating, isn't it? I might have done writing, or I might have done probably not singing or anything musical, because I feel like that isn't something I have. But it also made me think, like, I heard someone else saying this, and it goes back to education. There's something about education that really boxes people up. Like, there's the one who's good at art, and the one who's good at music, or the one who's good at sports. And it's like you can only be good at one thing. Like, really early on, I think kids learn that, and they look at each other and go, well, that's the one that's good at art, so I can't do that. That can't be my thing. And I really think there should be more of a push to say, like, why don't we all try and just sort of see where we can go with everything? We all do it differently anyway. So I think I don't know, I like to think I would have found a way of doing it anyway, or at least keeping up with it, even if I did something else. I don't know, what do you think? Because your parents, well, your mum was actually a painter.
I'm going to send you all her fashion drawings sometime today. I remember when you were extremely young. We've got pictures of you painting on my paintings from when you could walk around, say from 5 and 6 and onwards. But when you were very little, I remember you sitting on my desk, and I would be drawing and you would be drawing. I would be sitting on a chair, sitting at a desk properly, but you would be sitting cross-legged, actually on the paper you were drawing on. And I used to think in terms of how long a piece took. Would it be 3 or 4 or 5 times listening to the complete Fantastic Mr. Fox? Because it was on endless repeat. And you would be...
Farmer Bean. I still remember all of those names.
Yeah, so you would be absolutely engrossed in the story time and time again and working. And I would be sitting there working. And there was no real connection between what I did and what you did. You did your own thing. I mean, typically you would be endlessly painting horses, whatever I was doing. And you wouldn't allow me to interfere. wouldn't allow me to make a suggestion.
So maybe one of the things that's really important for kids doing anything creative is just being sort of allowed and given time and space somewhere with the radio or a book on to just do what they're going to do anyway. And if your parents are artists, that is the space that's created. Whereas if your parents, I don't know, work out of doors, or you have the TV on, or different things are going on in the house that where it's difficult to sit down like that, maybe that's one of the things that can be an issue.
I think all kids are hardwired to be artistic, and the trick is not to teach them, but to not stop them.
Yeah.
Not humiliate them, not laugh at their efforts, not treat them as trivial. And that is as important in school as it is in the home. And then going to art school, kids are humiliated and abused.
And I
It's
think there's
not a good practice.
I really, really think there's a toxic element of competition in schools that absolutely has no place there whatsoever. From my experience of teaching kids, the one thing that's just going to kill their enthusiasm dead is being thought they're going to be compared to someone else. And it's sort of, I think in some things it can kind of work, but actually I've often found like kids don't like competition. Even if they win, someone has to lose and someone gets sad. And actually, like, particularly with art, it's such a sensitive personal thing that if there's any element of someone being better than someone else, and they constantly look at you for sort of affirmation, they notice if you're saying it to one child more than another. So you have to be really conscious of that. And that's not to say you lie and say something's great, but there isn't any lying with that involved anyway, because whatever they do, their own way of doing it is interesting and, lovely, because it's their way of doing it. And I think the one time where I've noticed kids feeling really uncomfortable about doing art is often if their older sibling is also in the room doing it. And their older sibling is very comfortable and, drawing in an accomplished way, they'll often look over and then get very anxious about what they're doing. And I think that's the same thing. It's that element of feeling like there's a hierarchy in creativity. And if you're not one of the sort of chosen ones, then you best just put your pen down.
Well, the thing is that people think children are learning to draw or paint. What they're actually doing is learning to see. They're training their own eyes. And what their marks are is essentially symbolic rather than representative. So if a child makes a little stick figure and says that's mum, to the child, their image is of their mum. And it's just a symbol. In the same way as the letters, when they're a bit older, when you write M-U-M, that is mum. And the symbol they draw is mum. It's a symbol and it evokes mum. And you can't say, oh, that doesn't look like your mum, because that is destructive. But you could say, ooh, but your mum is wearing a green dress today. And they can correct that, because that doesn't clash with the symbol. So as long as you accept that the symbol is an accurate representation, because it is a symbol, not a portrait. And then you can tweak it and tweak it and tweak it till they see more. And that's what it's about. It's about the eye is not a perfect optical instrument. It's a very imperfect one. The brain, on the other hand, is brilliant at interpreting. So you need to address the interpreting and the hand-eye coordination and accept that the symbol tells the whole story in a few lines.
Yeah, and I've often found as well, they don't, for a long time, they don't care to know what will make it look more like the thing they're drawing or painting. They do just want to be left alone to kind of make what they're going to make. I mean, really, that's the difficulty, I think, being an art teacher, is that, shut up.
Well, don't shut up, but, be the equivalent of the Fantastic Mr. Fox. Tell them a story.
Yeah, and actually not shut up, but encourage, because I think there's something like being creative is sort of like having a little wild animal in your brain, and it's so easily frightened off, and it has to be very kind of gently and, you know, appeasingly coaxed into feeling comfortable. I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe this is just the kids that I have, but they're
No,
very easily dissuaded. And I think
it's,
that's part of that whole having to specialize so early. So having that thing, well, okay, well, you're good, so we'll push you to carry on, and you're not, so let's see what else you can do. Why don't we just let everyone kind of mull on it, on all of these things?
yeah.
And allow people to have their own way of doing it. Okay, another question. Alan Basis wants to know, do you draw inspiration from old work? And I think that's going to have to be our last question for this time.
Yes. I love going through old sketchbooks. And if I've done it last week, it doesn't matter, because every time I see it differently. And I was going to say it looks to me like it was done by someone else. And the truth is it was done by another me, one in the past, different time. And I love looking at them. And I can look at one and think, oh my God, I wish, yes, I'd planned to do that as a painting and moved on and never came back to it. So, you know, when I have a painting to do, I'm often thinking about the current input, but there is very often a sort of treasure trove of half-formed ideas from the past, or well-formed ideas for something else entirely that's suddenly seen in a different way. I have done a painting which literally I didn't recognize was a painting I'd already done, but the second painting was at 90 degrees. Yeah, the answer is yes. It's critically important, that archive you build up in old sketchbooks. It's absolutely critically important that you keep that. And I would say further, don't buy sketchbooks where the pages are easily torn out. Keep every page. If you do something you don't like, you can work on it, but don't tear it out.
I remember you saying to me very early on, I think I bought a sketchbook and it was spiral bound, and you said, oh, don't get spiral bound, you can pull the pages out, it's really impermanent. And you can't have it rebound easily in something. And even now when I go to the art shops, I will always get like stitched. But it's weird because it's really difficult to find, like, maybe particularly in Japan, but whenever I go to the art shop here, every single sketchbook is spiral bound. And I find that really odd because it is ugly as well. It doesn't look very nice having spiral bound sketchbooks. Whereas if you've got a stitched one, it's got that, you know, a proper spine on it.
And you can't, spiral binding doesn't lend itself to be put on a shelf. You can't do it. Sadly, the books that you can buy tend to be a very limited range of papers. And this week, I bought a ream, that's 500 sheets of detail paper, because my local art shop has stopped selling detail paper. I used to buy it in pads, and the pads would disintegrate as I worked on them. So I've got them bound into books. My sketchbooks are books there. I want this paper and I want it in a permanent book. And the only way I could do it was to get them, buy the paper and get the books bound.
I think we're going to have to start a little stationery, aren't we, with certain kinds of sketchbooks? Because, yeah, there's sort of certain things, certain ways of working on paper that are just much, much better. Some sketchbooks, like, don't know if I've got one here, but it's stitch bound. It's really heavy watercolor paper, and it's probably only got about 20 pages in it. But you can open it right out like that really easily because there's thick stitches through it and it's thick paper, and it closes flat. And there are just some things that are just better, much, much better to use. And you just think, why isn't everything like this? If there's something definitely better, why are all of these other... I've bought watercolor sketchbooks where the pages don't just buckle, but the colour like seeps through to the, you know, it's just, if there's a good way of doing it, why is there so much tut? Anyway, I want to ask a question of everyone watching, which is, as we're going into doing the podcasts, Dad and I have both been making lists of people we want to invite to talk, but I'd really like to find out if anyone else has some suggestions or ideas of people they'd like to hear talking with Dad about creativity in the future and their projects and processes. So if you could comment on the video as well, if you have ideas for people, that would be great, wouldn't it? Mm. So is there anything that you'd like to say before we go? I think we've done a good chunk of time.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us. Yes. And is this going to be a podcast as well? Yes, it is. You said it would be the first.
Yeah, I think we might put them all up as the podcasts, and just sort of from now on in, bear in mind this is going to be a podcast.
Okay, well, thank you. And just one other thing I didn't mention last time. We've got the new calendar out. It's in the shop now. I'm doing an exhibition at Trading Boundaries for the whole of November and the whole of December. And I hope it'll be possible for people to visit. Michael thinks he's going to be able to maintain social distancing. I hope he can. It's going to be interesting. Michael has taken an opportunity of the lockdown to completely renovate the building. So it looks very different now.
Mm.
Anyway, exciting.
Mm.
We will put a posting about that soon too.
Yeah, so we've got the exhibition, the podcast coming up with some brilliant people who've agreed already. We want to know some more people. We've got the course starting on the 28th if you want to join our course as well.
Yeah.
I think that's everything, isn't it?
I've got to rush off and do I don't know what those little front pages of a podcast are called, a sort of logo, title page, whatever. I've got to finish that today.
And we're also moving the house.
Yes, yes. Oh, yes, yes. Well, we've had to rethink where we're going to put it because there's a badger, very exciting. A badger has decided to take up residence in the original site, which is very symbolic and very, like a very good omen, it seems to me. So we're going to put it in a slightly different site. We can't disturb the badger.
No.
If ever we see him, we'll take his picture.
How do you know it's a him?
Sorry?
How do you know it's a him?
I'm thinking it might even be a family. I don't know.
Nice. Well, yeah, thank you everyone for joining and for your questions, and we will see you again next week.
Yes, there will be a lot of questions we didn't get around to, so apologies and thank you. Even if we don't get around to them, please keep sending them.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.